hearing the song On Top of Their Game from the album World Traveler by Surfer Joe. You can find that at surferjoe.bandcamp.com and check out the album. Let them know that you heard about him here on the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Monster Kid Radio, and I am your host, writer, and producer, Derek M. Cook. Seriously, check out Surfer Joe, either on their website, which is surfmusic.net, or their Bandcamp page. Follow the link in the show notes. Or check them out in concert. They're on tour right now. There are links, like I said, in the show notes to their website where you can check out their European tour dates and locations. But do that when you're done listening to this episode of the podcast. This podcast this week, looking at the year of 1954, the year in monsters and movies and a little bit more. It's a fun conversation that I had with longtime friend Matthew Rashleigh. Matt and I got together and chatted for over an hour about all the movie releases that are relevant to Monster Kids and then some from the year 1954. Now, I edited that down to about 45 minutes, so it's still listenable, but it was a great conversation. I had a great time chatting with Matt, and that's what the bulk of this episode is all about. But it's not the only thing this episode is all about. Of course, we've got our regular segments. We got Mark MATZKE'S Beta Capsule Review and Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. But Beth and I also went to go see a movie last weekend, and I wanted to talk about it here. She wanted to talk about it here. So we have a spoiler review of Late Night with the Devil. We don't get too in-depth, but we do spoil a couple of things here and there. Check the show notes again over at monsterkidradio.net because I put time codes in to let you know what part of the show happens when. And if you want to skip over the spoilers for Late Night with the Devil, well, now you know how to do that. And I'm going to try to do that with every episode of Monster Kid Radio. If that's something that y'all like and it's something that I can keep doing without throwing too much more work onto the Monster Kid Radio pile. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with Mail Order Zombie. You know, I've been making some rumblings, some vague comments on Facebook about what's going on, and eagle-eared, sharp-eared, elven-eared, people who are listening to the podcast really, really well have heard me mention what's going on with Mail Order Zombie in the past, but I'm going to get a little bit more in-depth about it this time around as well, so stay tuned for that. That's all coming up in this episode of the podcast. Of course, you're going to hear Surfer Joe at the very end of the show, this song in its entirety, so stay tuned for that. Before we get into all of that, though, I just want to take a moment and say thank you to those of you who follow me on Facebook and have been kind of tracking what's going on with me and Wednesday. Wednesday had to go to the vet, kind of an emergency-like situation, and because I'm currently not working, it was kind of scary because we didn't know how much it was going to cost and that sort of thing. Some listeners stepped up and offered to help out, and I just want to say thank you to them. I'm not going to call anybody out. I don't want to embarrass anybody. I just want to say thank you to those of you who helped make sure I could get Wednesday to the vet. Just so everybody knows, she is in the other room right now, loaded up with long-acting antibiotics and painkiller, and she's very cuddly right now, so I'm assuming she's going to be okay. We do have a follow-up appointment scheduled with her vet next week. Also, a couple of you have reached out to me regarding my job search. I appreciate all of that as well. And if you are aware of any job openings for a guy like me, you know, send them my way. I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate all of you who've already done that. It's been really appreciated and just lets me know that y'all aren't just my listeners. We're all family here at Monster Kid Radio. So again, thanks for that. Let's get on to the bulk of the episode. We've got what's going on with Mail Order Zombie, Late Night with the Devil. We've got 1954, Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland, but we're going to kick all of that off with Mark's Beta Capsule Review right now.
Sheer stark terror grips you in underwater 3D in Creature from the Black Lagoon.
The most terrifying monster of the ages rises from the sea, raging with pent-up passions,
Making every man his mortal enemy, every woman's beauty his prey.
Creature from the Black Lagoon in 3D, starring Richard Carlson and Julie Adams.
Every horrifying scene leaps out of the screen right at you.
A Universal re-release, rated G.
Watch out for them! A menace never known to man or beast before. An endless horde of crawling, crushing, gigantic creatures. So horrifying there was no word to describe them.
Watch out for them! Watch out for Warner Brothers' screaming new shock sensation, them!
Yes, I saw them. They were huge and scaly, and they had gigantic jaws, and then one came at me.
Kill one and two take its place. This is the endless onslaught of them, clawing up out of the earth from mile-deep catacombs.
See them, the most astounding journey into terror ever taken, starring James Whitmore, Edmund Gwenn, Joan Weldon, and James Arness. Them!
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Return of Ultraman, Episode 46, Fill This Blow with Anger. Original air date, February 25th, 1972. A Kamishibai artist, complete with a reel-to-reel tape of authentic music and sound effects, tells the story of MAT defeating Kaiju Red Killer to a large group of neighborhood children. Jiro Sakata, who is watching with his friends, is surprised when the storyteller says that Ultraman cannot be trusted to protect the Earth because he is an alien. This seems to be a motivational comment to inspire the kids to action, but his true intent is quickly revealed when he throws one of the children off a bridge, right in front of a monster attack team patrol car. The man then rushes to the child's aid, claiming that MAT is responsible for the incident. Captain Ibuki leads the investigation, and since Go was driving the car, he is suspended from duty, effective immediately. The artist, a shape-shifting Zool alien, is instructed to release Boomerang Monster Red Killer, making sure it is defeated by MAT so that Ultraman will be regarded as unnecessary. Jiro recognizes that everything is unfolding according to the Kamishibai story, while Go stays at the hospital bedside of Toru, the child who knows he is innocent. Red Killer is revived and begins tearing a path to the hospital with the intent of assassinating Hideki Go, who cannot join the fight unless he is somehow reinstated to MAT. Fill This Blow with Anger is truly thought-provoking in that it's both self-referential, or meta if you'd prefer, and within that framework incorporates a very old-school cultural reference. I'm talking about Kamishibai, the art of storytelling featured in this episode. Kamishibai is simple. It's a series of static pictures displayed while a storyteller narrates the action. The person telling the story removes each picture as the plot advances, like a slideshow. Kamishibai artists would set up their wooden story frames wherever they thought they could attract a crowd of children, often selling candy with each appearance and returning on a regular schedule to tell stories in serial fashion. This, of course, predated radio and television by many decades, and there are direct correlations between it and both manga and anime. It's a bit unfortunate that Kamishibai is exploited for evil purposes in episode 46. Even so, the power of this kind of pre-tube entertainment is quite evident. The meta part of Fill This Blow with Anger is the fact that the alien's Kamishibai story is about Monster Attack Team, and thanks to his tape player, he has theme music and sound effects that would evidently be recognized in-world as belonging to this Ultraman. The circle is completed at the end of the show with Jiro and Toru sporting Ultraman masks while imitating their favorite superhero. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Built to serve man, its brain was an electronic miracle. It could think 1,000 times faster, kill 1,000 times faster. Then suddenly it became a Frankenstein of steel, out to destroy its makers. Thrilled to miracles of science beyond imagination. Light that melts steel from a station in space. Rays that destroy man's most destructive weapons. Love that conquers terror. A strangely, intensely exciting romance in a world all its own. Sound that kills. The same frequency. Get out of here, all of you. At this intensity, sound can kill.
Get control to a phone. Get some men up here and restore order.
But what power on earth could stop it?
Tobor, the most amazing, the most fantastic creation of man's mind.
Oh, he looks alive.
For Tobor can live where no human can breathe in the airless atmosphere of outer space. And the nation first to conquer space controls the world. Electronic scientists have designed a practical spaceship. Atomic power makes space travel possible, needing only the most valuable of all secret scientific achievements. Space-conquering giants that man can control.
Tobor is alive. For even though much work remains before he's completed, he is already a sentient being, a necessary adjunct to the recording of all experiences our human space crews may later encounter.
Since we cannot get in to see Nordstrom's secrets for ourselves, we must induce him to come out and tell them to us.
We have no news of Professor Nordstrom or the boy. Neither has the Los Angeles Police Department nor the FBI.
I take it you want the formulae for my extrasensory transmission method.
Gramps, don't you tell him! Don't you do it! Please don't you tell him! Don't, Gramps, don't!
All right. You win.
Tobor, bringing you chills you've never known before. Tobor, the most human outer space man ever seen on Earth. Be sure to see Tobor.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radioheads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today we are talking about 1954, the year in monsters. As I perused the films released that year, I noticed there was a wave of robot movies. I want to focus on them in this segment. In Famous Monsters 12 from June of 1961 and FM 15 from January of 1962, we find a two-part article that rode that robot wave into the hearts and minds of young monster kids. All four of the 1954 classic robot films were featured here. Let's listen to what was said about these four from '54. Tobor the Great was an anthropomorphical servo mechanism. You know it's true, or we wouldn't publish it in FM. But since only King Kong has a mouth big enough for a mouthful like that, we'll run it through our special translation machine to find out what it means. The robo-translator says, Tobor is robot spelled backwards. He was made in human form to serve man. Ah, now we have it. In the picture, Tobor was designed to replace a human pilot on the Pioneer trip to the moon. But enemy agents sabotaged the moon flight by kidnapping Tobor. That's the way you kidnap a metal man. No kidding. And turning him against his inventor, a la Frankenstein. Would you call a metal Frankenstein a Crankenstein? No, we didn't think you would. Only the twisted Nearb, that's backward brain, of an Ackermanoid robot would pull such a horrible nup as that. Gog wasn't bad either, although quite different in construction from Gort. Whereas Gort resembled human beings, Gog had a half a dozen arms, 2 in front, 2 in back, and 2 on both sides, a much more convenient arrangement than human beings, and moved about on a tractor principle rather than clumsy legs. Altogether, an improvement over people, I'd say. Too bad the MATZKE'S got control of him and made him do mean things, so that the scientists weren't his friends anymore and destroyed him. Diabolicus, that's just a name I made up, was the metal servant of the Devil Girl from Mars. He was pretty diabolical, all right, as you can see from the picture. Take the Tin Can Man of Target Earth, a real troublemaker, a soldier of steel sent from Venus, complete with death ray. Unfortunately, however, this robot was so unconvincingly constructed that it generated fear in no one, unless it was the backers of the picture that they wouldn't get their money back. This warrior robot looked like little other than a discarded collection of cans built around a big barrel with a man inside. As the robot's ray operated in high-frequency kilocycles, legend has it that the man inside the robot was Robert Bloch, a speculation he has never bothered to deny, and which, as it corresponded with the shooting time of the picture, would explain his mysterious 2-week absence of his from Rossum Junior High.
We saw this with our own eyes, an object the like of which we had never seen before. A frightening, strange shape descending from outer space with relentless purpose. Where did it come from? And what did it want of us?
Hello! It's an aircraft, all right, but like nothing I've ever seen before. Hello! What do you mean? Hello! It's like something from another planet.
Do not try to follow me. You cannot get help. Around this house, I've drawn an invisible wall through which no one may pass.
Here is a news reporter with a world-shattering story. A girl trying to escape from her past. The scientist trapped in spite of his knowledge. And here also is the barmaid, hiding a murderer's secret. A murderer with a life already forfeit. And introducing the Devil Girl from Mars herself.
Get back or I'll fire.
You fool.
Get back!
Shoot, man, shoot!
You'll get those hysterical, hilarious horrors when you join those Bowery boys as overnight guests in a mansion of merry maniacs.
We just want your heads. Well.
Oh, well, if you said that in a quick... Our heads?
Uncle Anton, the scientific stoop.
Would you like a high cut or a low cut, sir?
Oh, I'd like a low cut.
Uncle Derek, the medical madman.
What is it you're trying to say?
Help!
Cousin Francine, the fluff with the stuff.
I mean business.
Aunt Amelia, who's no camellia. The butler Grisson, he's gruesome. The family tree, a man-eating honeysuckle.
Boy, I feel just like a space cadet. This will register his brain potential.
My friend here has a vacuum-packed head.
The Bowery boys get the heebies, the jeebies, the willies, and the shakes, while you get the laughs of the year.
Monster Kid Radio listeners, every episode of this podcast is kind of like a time machine when we go back and look at an older movie, a classic or not so classic film of yesteryear. And this time around on the show, we are literally going back into, well, not literally. I wish we could, because how many awesome first-run monster movies would I go back in time to see? Go back and kill baby Hitler? Nah, man. I'm going to the premiere of Creature from the Black Lagoon. Anyway, I may have just revealed way too much about myself. Let's get back on track. 1954 is the year we're going to this time around, and we're doing it with Matthew Rashleigh. Matt is one of my oldest friends. Met him in film school. He's been on the podcast a few times now, and I'd like to have him on more often if we can make our schedules and our interests line up. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Derek. I'm so happy to be here. My time circuits are on. Let's go. 1954.
All right, I'm going to fire up the flux capacitor and hop inside the TARDIS and turn on the hot tub. I don't know. I don't know how many Time Machine jokes I can make. Moving on. We're going to look at 1954. This is actually something that I think you kind of brought up as a possibility. The topic, anyway.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you and I had been talking about, Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is one of your all-time favorites, one of the best ever. And kind of, you start Googling and you're like, oh, it came out in 54. Oh, Godzilla came out in 54. 70th anniversary of that. You start looking at the list, you're like, Seven Samurai. Alfred Hitchcock had 2 movies that year. You're like, whoa, 54, there's something special here. And then you're like, oh, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And the list just goes on. And it was like one of those moments where like all the numbers and movies were swirling around my head. And I'm like, there's something special here and we should talk about it.
In 1954, there's a lot of things going on in the world and in America. The economy was up. TV was real popular at this point. It's gaining grounds in terms of like the primary source of entertainment for families, that sort of thing. Movie tickets are only about 70 cents or so. So a lot of people are going to the movies still, even though TV's picking up. 54 saw the debut of Burger King. It saw the first indoor shopping mall. There's a lot of things happening in 54. The Nutcracker debuted in 1954. Elvis releases his first album, or his first single, called That's All Right. The song Rock Around the Clock is recorded, and that's considered one of the first rock and roll songs that began the rock era, supposedly, according to a lot of experts. I'm more of a surf guy, so I don't really know for sure. Sports Illustrated debuted that year. A lot of stuff happening in 1954, and some great films are starting to come out. Not just genre horror stuff, but just in general. The 50s, man, it's a sweet spot for a lot of cinema. And I don't know if it's because Hollywood has finally matured to the point to where they can start cranking things out, if we're seeing a breakdown of the studio system that kind of held Hollywood in its grasp for so long, and now more people are starting to make movies. Roger Corman's first produced film came out in 54, for example. So I don't know what the deal is, what the zeitgeist was like at the time that made it possible for so many movies to be coming out in the 50s. 54 is certainly special because of Preacher, though, for sure.
Yeah, I think that also maybe the Hollywood system was starting to see the impact of television, and they knew that they really had to do entertainment that would draw people out, to give them things that they couldn't see on a television, like big epic movies, big scenes, Technicolor, all those things. A lot of film aficionados always talk about 39 being the best year, but I think that when you look at 1954, it's this really interesting moment where you have a lot of movies that are still in black and white, but you're starting to see a big transition to Technicolor and a lot of different widescreen formats. You're also seeing a lot of more international films. Like if you look at 54, Japan was huge that year. The fact that you had Godzilla, Seven Samurai. There's another one that I haven't seen that I've read a lot about, Sancho the Bailiff, which was supposed to be one of the best Japanese films ever. All three were released in 54. So it's really interesting. You also have, unlike 39, you have great movies across many genres. You know, you have science fiction, you have horror, but you also have musical. You have A Star is Born. You have White Christmas. You have Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Like you have all these big movies that mom or grandma loves. But you also, like we said, you have Godzilla and Creature from the Black Lagoon, which we love and our grandparents' generation loved. So it's really fascinating.
One thing that I did not look up, and I meant to, because I tried to do a little bit of research for this episode, but I failed to look up the rise of the drive-in movie theater, which I believe did happen in the 50s as well, 50s and 60s. And I'm wondering how much of that also impacted the film output with studios in Hollywood and producers realizing, hey, here's a whole new market. Let's flood them. Let's give them what they want. Let's get some cars in those parking spots, as opposed to just putting butts in the seats. The 50s also saw the return of some gimmicky, or maybe the birth of some gimmicky type things like 3D, which you couldn't get on television either.
Also with the idea of getting more people in and giving them value, double features. Like you mentioned, Roger Corman, first movie produced in 54, and having a lot of interesting B pictures on the other side of A pictures. Mm-hmm. Another one that came out in 54 was Gog, which I have not seen, but you're aware of. And I know the trilogy, and I need to get around to seeing that one. But obviously that wasn't an A picture, that was a B picture, but it stuck in the memories of a lot of folks.
That trilogy, The Office of Scientific Investigation, I highly recommend. I think it's very underrated. It's fantastic. The first film is The Magnetic Monster, which is actually my favorite of the three. And then 54 didn't just see Gog, which is the third film in the trilogy, but Riders to the Stars, which was the second film in the trilogy, came out that year as well, earlier in the year. And it was co-directed by Richard Carlson, who was the star of The Magnetic Monster, one of the stars of Riders to the Stars, and of course, one of the leads of Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think Riders to the Stars is the most underrated of the three, but I do love the magnetic monster the most. But Gog seems to get a lot of attention. It's really good. It's very, very good. And we keep calling it a trilogy. It's not like it's the same characters from film to film to film. It's just they're all OSI films, Office of Scientific Investigation. Matt, if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend them, especially the magnetic monster. It's one of my favorites.
I've seen the magnetic monster, and it's great. I love the fact they tried to lock it down into sounding scientific.
Yeah.
To give it some sense of realism, which makes the finale pay off even more so.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to spoil anything, even though it's over 70 years old. But you're right. It's a special movie. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing the two other OSI films.
I highly recommend. Another movie that came out in 1954, The Mad Magician. So you do have some Vincent Price recognition or participation in the year with that film, which thematically is basically a spiritual remake of House of Wax. It's not as good as House of Wax, I don't think, but it's still pretty good. And again, it's Vincent Price. It's hard to go wrong with Price. The big players, the big dogs, when it comes to genre films are the three: Creature from the Black Lagoon, Godzilla, and one we haven't mentioned yet, Them. Them comes out in 1954. And even though Universal is kind of known for the big bug monster movies, with the Deadly Mantis and Tarantula and all that, Them is not a Universal picture, but man, I hate to say it because I love Universal. I'm a Universal fanboy. It's the best of the big bug monster movies. It's so good.
Leading up to this conversation, I watched Them this week from beginning to end.
Oh, so good.
It was one of those movies that I definitely seen snips of. It's a cultural icon, so it's made its way into memes and GIFs and other things. But to sit down and watch it from beginning to end, I have to say, it really stands up. I think it's probably, I always thought the Tarantula was the best of the big bug movies.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something really special about Them. I think Them is probably better than Tarantula for me.
I love Tarantula. It's got John Agar. It's got iconic music. It's got Mara Corday. It's got everything that makes a movie good. But Them is scary. Tarantula's good. It's got some thrills, but Them is genuinely terrifying.
I don't think this is a spoiler for most people listening to this, but early on in Them, that little girl walking through the desert.
Yes.
With that blank stare and the broken baby doll. It's just horrifying. And the way that you go from scene to scene of disaster with no real clues to what happened, the setup is great.
Mm.
And then the effects are wonderful. I was doing a little bit of research and I was surprised that Them was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Special Effects. It lost to a movie that had a budget multiple times bigger than it, but those giant ants are incredible. I also saw that by watching it, I saw that it seemed like it was a real inspiration for Aliens. The way that the flamethrowers are used, the way that they engage the ants underground. The whole time I was thinking, I think James Cameron's seen this movie and likes it a lot because he definitely followed some of the same shots and same scenes almost.
I could see that. Something I don't know if I've really thought too much about, although somebody might go back and listen to an old episode of Monster Kid Radio where I'm talking about Them and it came up. I don't remember. But no, you are absolutely right. I could see some inspiration bleeding out of Them into things like Aliens, for sure. I didn't pull up a list of all the films that were released in 1954, but holy cow, you weren't kidding. There's a lot of, film noir, fantasy films, some Disney stuff, like you said, 20,000 Leagues. Wow. There's
and westerns,
really
too.
good movies that came out in 1954.
Yeah, I just watched Johnny Guitar for the first time with Joan Crawford.
Nice.
Amazing. The reviews at the time weren't great, but I think it's because it was about a strong woman lead versus another strong woman villain. And it's really hardcore, especially when you look at it coming from the 50s.
Yeah.
Some of the gunfights in that are brutal. But the whole time I was thinking, 1 year, and yet you have such a wide variety of movies, and there's so many of them that are so great.
Yeah.
You just mentioned 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's the movie that won the Academy Award for special effects over Them. And I think that movie stands out as one of Disney's best live action movies.
I think so too. I would go there as well. And we have talked about that here on the show many, many moons ago with Scott and Tracy Morris from the Disney Indiana podcast. And I don't think I've watched it since then. I'd like to go back and revisit it at some point because it is so good. And Kirk Douglas is phenomenal in that. His performance is joyful and boastful and full of life and charismatic, and you can't help but just root for him the entire time. And it's such a wonderful production in terms of its design, not just the special effects, but everything about it. The live action films of Disney of the 50s and 60s were pretty special.
And James Mason as Captain Nemo, like, he sets such a high bar. I think anybody who reads the book or thinks of the story, that's the Captain Nemo you picture. He's so charismatic and so completely committed to the role and to what he stands for and what he's about. It really stands out. And I know that we're talking about how great a movie it is on those standards alone, but the giant squid in that is probably one of the best big monster fights on film, I think. It holds up so well. Like, I've watched it with my kids, and they still love it, even though it's old and there's no CGI. Across the board, the effects, the music, the writing, it's just a great movie.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. So another movie that I wanted to mention just briefly, Hammer Films released a film in 1954 that I think is really good and does bear mentioning. Their gothic horror stuff didn't really kick in until a little bit later, but in 1954 we did see the release of a movie called The Unholy Four, which gets packaged with a lot of their so-called film noir films. I don't know if I consider most of these films that are called the Hammer Noirs true noir films, but they are dark, suspenseful, and have great black and white photography. Maybe they are noir, I don't know. But The Unholy Four comes out in 54 as well, and it's really good. And something that I would recommend people check out as well. So you do have a little bit of Hammer representation. You've got stuff happening in Japan with Godzilla, which to this day still resonates.
I think Godzilla is really having a moment now. -1 coming out and winning an Oscar, and then a new Godzilla Kong movie. Everyone, with all the Godzilla that's out there, people are looking back at the 54 version and seeing how iconic it was. Like, it goes beyond pop culture and all the Godzilla movies we had after it versus other kaiju that are really entertaining, but maybe don't get their due with film aficionados or people who tilt their nose up a little bit. But I think a lot of film historians are now looking back going, wow, Godzilla is special and it should be celebrated.
For sure.
It all goes back to that first film.
Yeah. Now, it didn't get released in the U.S. until a couple of years later as Godzilla King of the Monsters with Perry Mason added to the or Raymond Burr added to the mix. So this is the original 54 Japanese release, Gojira. But still, super important film, vital film, really. And not the only film that came out this year that danced around the idea of bombs and radiation and all of that being a very destructive force, not just in terms of, we're going to use it to make giant monsters like in them, but how it is something that could destroy all life or destroy the planet. There's a movie that came out in 54 called The Venusian, in which a Venus alien lands in Britain and meets up with a young American woman and tries to convince all of Earth's leaders that nuclear weapons are going to destroy the world, and not just the world, but the entire solar system. Knock it off, which I know isn't unique to the 50s. We saw The Day Theater Stood Still and Plan 9 from Outer Space later on, and things. Wow, I just mentioned Day Theater Stood Still and Plan 9 from Outer Space in the same breath. But I find that interesting as well, that it wasn't just Japan saying, hey, nuclear weapons bad. It's happening with some British films as well, and them has the anti-radiation cloud over it. I think that's interesting too.
I think that there's definitely room for some great conversations about the atomic era in cinema and how it kind of reflects a lot of people's anxieties and fears, as well as the Red Scare that was a part of that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of horror and sci-fi was rooted in that reality that everyone had on their minds. And there's some great cinema that came out of that, like the ones you mentioned.
Man, I can't believe you hadn't seen them from start to finish until recently. How exciting. Oh.
And so good. So worth it. If you haven't seen them from beginning to end, listeners, give yourself the 90 minutes and do it. Just do it.
Heck yeah. So good. So good. Other films that came out in 54, I mentioned Corman's first film as a producer had come out was Monster from the Ocean Floor, which, no, it doesn't have the same resonance as Godzilla or Them or even Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's a Corman film, and it's something that you probably would have seen played at a drive-in somewhere. But it's the first one he produced. And Corman would go on to have such an amazing career and help launch the careers of so many other amazing filmmakers. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Oh, for sure. And Ocean Floor, I think it left me wanting to see more Creature on the screen. But you see a lot of beginnings of what makes Roger Corman so great, and his films that follow it so much fun, and giving monsters more movie time on the screen. However many days he could get and however many dollars. You mentioned suspense earlier. Alfred Hitchcock had 2 films come out in 54.
I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned Hitchcock at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
What were the 2 Hitchcock films?
Well, Rear Window, one of his best, and Dial M for Murder, which I had never watched in its entirety until recently.
Yeah.
And it's a good time.
I'm sure I've watched all of Hitchcock's at this point.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen Rear Window since college days.
But Dial M for Murder, I'm trying to remember that one.
Well, it has an actor that you really like in it. Ray Milland plays the lead.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, he plays the lead, and originally Hitchcock wanted Cary Grant, but the studio wouldn't let him do it because they thought it was too dark and was afraid of what audiences would think if they saw Cary Grant in a role that turns rather villain. And what's interesting is when you watch it, it feels like Ray Milland is trying to do his best Cary Grant impersonation early in the film. And about halfway through, he starts doing his own thing. And Milland, an Oscar winner, also did some great stuff with Corman, The Man with X-Ray Eyes.
Oh, such a good film.
He definitely brings something special to that role. And it also builds suspense in a way that only Hitchcock can.
Interesting to hear you say that about the Cary Grant not being allowed by the studios. They didn't want to go that route. Because I've seen Cary Grant. Granted, it's Cary Grant, so he's always going to be, the charming guy. But I've seen him do some dark stuff too, dark-ish. Even in Hitchcock's Notorious, he's not the hero persona that we get out of something like North by Northwest. He's a little bit more gray. It's at times.
Oh, that's a good point. Although in Dial M for Murder, I don't want to give too much away. The Ray Milland character, the husband, is looking for someone to murder his wife.
Okay.
So I think that's where they cross the line, and especially when the wife is Grace Kelly. I don't think that I could see how studios were nervous to see leading man Cary Grant trying to off Grace Kelly, 2 of the most beautiful people who were on the screen in the 50s.
Yeah, I can see that being a little different.
John Williams, the actor, the British actor, classic British actor, is wonderful as the chief inspector trying to figure it all out and Dial M for Murder. So if you haven't seen it, that's another one that you should pop up some popcorn, get your favorite beverage, and give it a watch.
I'm sure I've seen it. They kind of blend a little bit, which is probably terrible. Well, I wanted to go back to the radiation thing real quick, because not only did we have movies, and this one, it's not as big again as Them or whatever. Not only did we have the warnings of radiation, but we were starting to see that sometimes maybe a little bit of radiation would be okay. There was a movie that came out in 54 starring Mickey Rooney called The Atomic Kid. Are you familiar with this one?
No, I've never heard of it. Enlighten me.
It's a very lighthearted kind of comedic film. Mickey Rooney is a miner, a prospector. He's out eating a sandwich, and wanders onto an atomic bomb test site and gets exposed to radiation and then gets superpowers. And then helps the FBI break up a spy ring.
Wow. I think I need to watch that.
Mickey Rooney is the atomic kid. He's the prospector. Yeah.
And he must have really been a kid in that.
Let's see. It was put out by Republic Pictures. So Republic is probably best known to Monster Kid Radio listeners as the producers, a home of so many serials. So it has that kind of vibe to it.
Okay. There was some serious drama also in the year of 54 for movies. You had On the Waterfront.
Oh.
Won 8 Academy Awards. It gave you the Marlon Brando line, I could have been a contender. Not a monster movie. It has some moments that are pretty horrific and violent, but it stands up as a good movie. You at least have to mention it. When it comes to 54, we know that there's one that's really special to you. So please tell us about Creature from the Black Lagoon.
And with those words, Matt just extended the runtime of this podcast episode to about... No, I'm not going to go that long. Creature from the Black Lagoon, everybody knows it's my favorite film. Everybody who spends more than half an hour with me knows that it's my favorite film because I won't stop talking about it. It is, to me, pretty much the perfect monster movie. I love this film. This is comfort food for me, but it's not just a movie that I can put in and check out. It's a movie that engages me every single time. I practically notice something new every time I watch it, although we're starting to run out of new things because I've watched it so many times. You know, it came out of Universal, and I think it's telling that of all the iconic Universal monsters, whenever they decide that they're going to license them out to somebody to put on a product or put out a new release or whatever, that not only do they include the originals, you know, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, but the only representative of the 50s, of the so-called atomic era, is the Creature, the Gill-Man. Whenever they roll out, you know, the classic monsters, the only thing missing is this official monster cereal alongside Frankenberry and Count Chocula on all of them. Creature is a perfect stepping stone between the monster movies of the 40s to what we would have with the atomic horrors of the 50s. It mixes both. Now, is Creature an atomic horror film? Not really. You know, it's not really stated, and I don't think that's really meant to be implied that radiation had anything to do with the Gill-Man's creation or the dilemma people find themselves in the film. But it still has that kind of unknown monster from an unknown era vibe with man's modern approach to wanting to know more about the world, the quest for knowledge, and coming up against something that just can't be explained or from another era. It is a Jack Arnold film, so you've got the mini science lesson. Usually in the first half hour of all of his films, you get a mini science lesson of some sort, whether it's legitimate science or not. You're going to get a lecture from one of the characters, and nobody can deliver those lectures better than Richard Carlson, talking about the lungfish and why we need to study the fish that can breathe underwater at such pressure, because someday man's going to have to learn how to breathe in outer space, and maybe we can learn something from the fish that live so far into the water that the pressure is so great. The movie has nothing to do about looking for fish. It's about going to the Amazon to find out why there's a fossil of this weird-looking hand in the rock. I love the performances. I love the music. I love the direction. It's one of those 3D films. And I was just talking to somebody the other day during a job interview, actually. An icebreaker question was, tell us about your favorite movie. And then I bled all over about Creature and mentioned to the interviewer that I have this unwritten rule that if Creature from the Black Lagoon is playing in any theater anywhere within a 1 hour driving radius of me, I have to go see it. Whether I've seen the movie or not, I will go see it. Whether I've seen the movie recently or not, that is, I will go see it because it's Creature, and to see it on the big screen is just amazing. When I first launched Monster Kid Radio, the 99W Drive-In was showing it over the weekend, and I went twice, even though it was like an hour-long drive to get to, because, you know, Creature from the Black Lagoon at a drive-in in 3D, gotta see that. Love this film. And now that I think about it, it's been a while since I've seen it on the big screen. I'm going to have to find somebody to show it. So if anybody within an hour driving distance from me, has access to a movie theater and wants me to come out, you know what to do.
And that means other people will come too, because I've been lucky enough to watch Creature from the Black Lagoon with Derek, and it was in 3D, and having somebody who's there watching their favorite movie sit beside you, it makes it that much better. So I can tell you, whichever theater has it, you'll have at least one more ticket from me.
Fantastic, man. Creature is so good. So good. And, the music is iconic. And then everybody knows that I used to call Julie Adams my 50s girlfriend. She was so good in that film. Everybody's good in that film. Both Richards are great in that film. Just fantastic movie. Fantastic movie.
You mentioned the professor giving the science lesson.
Yeah.
It seems like that was really a product of the 1950s. And I don't know if that's because of the atomic age and people realizing, the fact that you had Oppenheimer being a celebrity scientist on the cover of magazines and seeing the power of the atom, if all of a sudden that wasn't more incorporated into film because of that. Because, when you look at a lot of those 50s films, they all seem to have a professor or a scientist, and partway through they kind of explain it to the characters and the audience, the scientific aspects of it, be it real or imaginary. But it seems like that was a real trope that exploded in that decade.
I think the 50s was probably the last time for a long time that we had the hero scientist role in the protagonist position in the films. You sure had mad scientist characters, the Invisible Man, Dr. Frankenstein, whatever. But in the 50s, there was a real lack of questioning the scientists. Yeah, maybe they were doing some things that got out of control, but nobody really faulted the scientists the way they would, say, like a Dr. Frankenstein or an Invisible Man. Or later on, you would start to see a questioning of all the authority figures, whether it's the scientist, the police, the clergy, that sort of thing. But in the 50s, they were still kind of looked upon as the hero characters. And I liked that. I like that as well. I love the hero scientist character. That's why I love the OI sci films so much, because I love the science hero.
Sure. I'm looking down the list. I think we've covered a lot of the A-list movies. There's quite a few B-list movies that I haven't seen, and maybe you have. I see that Devil Girl from Mars came out in 1954, giving us, leather-clad Martians. Do you know anything about this one?
Well, I think you just summed up why you need to see it. No. It was a B picture. It came out of England. I don't remember much about it, to be completely honest. I know I've seen it. I've not done a full-on episode of it yet on Monster Kid Radio, but I don't know if I can really tell you too much about it other than it was British. It was a B picture. It's about all I've got.
Coming to Earth with a robot, looking for breeding stock, men of Earth. I think I'm going to have to check this one out. We'll have to report back later on this one.
The biggest thing about that film, it sounds like Mars Needs Women may have taken that idea and swapped it. Instead of women coming to Earth looking for men, men coming to Earth looking for women.
Sure.
And speaking of robots, Tobor the Great, which was, it's a robot movie. I like it. Again, it's aimed more at kids than adults, I feel like. It's, a little boy gets a robot as a best friend. And the robot was originally designed to do, like, scientific stuff, test flights and things like that. But you start to see a lot of robot stuff happening in the 50s as well, and I love that. Who doesn't like a good robot, right?
Oh, absolutely. Just the idea of robot movie has me thinking, ooh, there should be a robot episode. There's so many great robots. Good and bad.
I did one, again, many, many moons ago with special effects artist Mitch Gonzalez, where we did like our top 3 favorite robots. But I wouldn't mind revisiting the topic because I've seen a lot more since then.
Yeah, I'm there for that. I see a lot of titles that came out in the 50s that have been redone, but I think that they just lifted the titles.
Fast and the Furious?
Fast and the Furious, Hell or High Water, The Bounty Hunter. We're getting to the bottom of the list. There's definitely more good movies above this as well.
Can't copyright a title.
And that means you can make money off of it, folks. So go ahead.
There are other rules about it, but you can't copyright it.
Oh, the Caine Mutiny came out in 1954 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not seen that since I was probably a teenager watching cable television. But you've got Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
So I'm there for that.
For sure.
Is there anything else that stands out to you as far as 1954 goes? As far as where we were at, as far as entertainment and movies were?
So there's one other thing I want to mention about 54, and that is 1954 also saw the release of a movie called The Rocket Man. Are you familiar with The Rocket Man?
Vaguely.
The reason I know The Rocket Man is, one, it was co-written by Lenny Bruce, of all people.
Wow.
But also is one of, if not the first genre film of John Agar.
Really?
Yeah, further cementing him as one of the patron saints of Monster Kid Radio. But other films that came out in 54 are other things that were happening in 54. You know, I mentioned television really becoming a thing. The Tonight Show debuted in 1954. I think at the time it was only called Tonight, but The Tonight Show came out in 54. And the other really big thing for nerds of all stripes these days, Lord of the Rings got published in 1954. Not a lot of fantasy, like that kind of fantasy films I'm seeing when I did my research about this particular year in releases. There were some fantasy films, sure, but not a lot of the swords and magic and that sort of thing that you would see in Tolkien. That would come later, I think, unless you know of any off the top of your head.
No, I was just going to say it doesn't seem like that was part of pop culture at the time. I think people were really forward looking as far as, you know, space and the power of the atom and aliens and giant bugs. I don't think that they were quite there yet to see that on the screen. However, like you mentioned, you know, Tolkien, epic. People love those books.
Yeah.
So I just think it took time for Hollywood to come back around, to get back in the saddle and pick up the sword.
Exactly. And we would see like the Peplum films, the sword and sandal films in the 60s starting to come out of Italy and that sort of thing. And of course, you'd see some of the stuff over here as well. But yeah, in the 50s, you didn't see a lot of it. Most of it was, if it was a genre picture, it was forward-looking. If it was a drama or an adventure film, you might see some Westerns still. You still saw some Westerns. And you'd still see some like pirate films. There was a Treasure Island sequel of all things that came out in 54. So you'd see some piratey type stories as well. But a lot of it was either modern drama or futuristic monsters from space or robots or that sort of thing. I am shocked, though, at the number of Japanese films that came out in 54, genre films even, that I've not seen. I'm looking at something right now called The Invisible Avenger.
Oh, wow. Never heard of that one.
I've never seen it. This is something I think I want to watch very soon and maybe even talk about here on the show. The first two sentences on the Internet Movie Database's synopsis or summary: a car strikes an unseen object. Blood spreads from an invisible source which becomes visible as the bleeding man dies. Dude, I'm in. That sounds awesome.
It sounds a lot like H-Man, which is great.
Which is also great.
Yeah. You know, maybe taking Monster Kid Radio and turning Japanese might be a good idea. Take a look at those genre films that came out in Japan in the 50s as they were rebuilding following World War II and the dropping of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
Because there was a lot of great filmmakers that had messages they wanted to say, but they didn't allow that to stop them from making great movies that were engaging. I mean, we mentioned Godzilla. I don't think you can make the point any better than that.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of 54 and atomic age, it was in March 1st that the first hydrogen bomb was tested at Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. So obviously, you know, the power of the atom and its destruction was definitely on the minds of people.
54, there's a lot happening in the 50s. In 54, there was a lot going on. We saw Brown versus the Board of Education happen. And segregation, you know, the separate but equal being thrown out. That's not really a thing. Let's desegregate. So we saw that starting to come out, you know, and I don't know if that really affected the films yet, I do like that we're starting to see filmmaking technology emerge in places like Japan or Mexico even. We're starting to see a lot of Mexican films start to pop up. Some of them genre-related. The luchador thing really didn't pick up until later in the 50s to become the thing that we celebrate here. And then the 60s and 70s, of course. But there are other Mexican films happening as well, a lot of them starring singing cowboys. But you got to see some stuff come out of Mexico as well, which I think is great. As we get more filmmaking technology in the hand of other parts of the world, we get to see other types of stories and start to see what was important to them or what they were reflecting on.
Mexico, with such a dynamic culture, was ripe for some great storytelling. And I definitely need to take some time and really explore more Mexican films for sure.
You ever watched a luchador movie?
I have, but it's been a long time. And I can't say that I was sober when I did. So
I would love to get together with you in person.
Yes, absolutely.
And watch one, maybe two, and then record about it for the show. Maybe we'll bring back Lucha de Mayo here on the show this May, and we'll check out some luchador films together.
Some Santo or something else.
That would be amazing. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think I've only seen one Santo film, so I'm definitely game for more.
Oh man, Champions of Justice. I think I got to show you Champions of Justice.
I'm there.
It's like the Avengers of luchador movies.
That's the best pitch I've heard all day. Granted, it's Sunday morning, but sounds wonderful.
We got the Bowery Boys Meet the Monsters coming out in 1954. We had some of the old Superman repackaged as a feature film coming out in 1954. A lot of stuff happening in 1954. Some great films. I think we covered, or at least I covered, all the things that I wanted to mention about things that happened in 1954. Miss America was first broadcast on television. So TV's trying, to take that audience away from movies with The Tonight Show and Miss America and that sort of thing. But man, for my money, for my time, and that imaginary time machine, if I get back to 1954, I'm spending months in the movie theaters instead of watching TV.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the list of some of the movies that are new to me. I haven't seen them. Is like Phantom of the Rue Morgue.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned the Bowery Boys. Ghost Cat of Uma Crossing. Have you heard of that one?
I've never seen it, man.
The Mad Magician.
Mentioned that one. That's Vincent Price.
The Snow Creature.
That one's fun. And that's something else, too. As we learn more about the world, we learn there are still places of the world that we don't know much about. So in Creature or Monster from the Ocean Floor, we're exploring the undersea realm. In The Snow Creature, we're exploring like the Himalayas, parts of the world that we can't normally get to. We're still finding parts of the world to try to explore in some of these movies, even though we have the science and the technology to blow part of the world up. We haven't looked at all the world yet. I think that's neat.
Another one that I see out of Mexico, La Bruja.
Oh, that's good.
We've got scientists. We've got a secret formula. We've got witches.
Yep.
Sounds like a good time.
Heck yeah. Listen,
are there any other
favorite films from 1954? I'm sure we've mentioned a few of them. We did have a Ma and Pa Kettle installment come out in 54. So, even back then there were franchises like the Ma and Pa Kettle films and that sort of thing. But yeah, what are some of your favorite films from 1954? I'd love to hear about it. What did we miss?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that we've definitely covered the ones that stand out to me. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was one of those movies that was early on available at video stores when we were kids.
Yep.
On the Disney shelves that at least my mom was okay with us renting, and it was live action and it was adventurous. And so that movie's always held a special place in my heart. And it's been fun. I'm always curious to see what old movies hold up with modern audiences, especially kids who are still kind of making up their minds as far as what they think is entertainment for them.
Yeah.
Speaking of time machines, Back to the Future did wonderfully with my kids. It's one of their favorites. But also, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's 70 years old. I can still watch it with them, and they want to watch it from beginning to end. It isn't like, oh, the effects are weird or the acting is off. It holds up. It keeps their attention from beginning to end. And so it's definitely on that list of best of 54 for me. It's been fun, like looking at the list and having favorites like that and Creature. but also looking at this list of movies and thinking, there are no old movies. They're just movies I haven't seen yet. And so taking a year like 54 and deciding, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch Joan Crawford and Johnny Guitar. And by doing that, it was a whole new experience for me. And it surprised me because at that point I'm thinking, well, 54, have we kind of already peaked for Westerns? I don't know. But sitting there and watching it, I'm like, oh, this is just as great as any other Western I'd seen in the last couple of years. And I had just watched Shane, and I'm like, it's more action-packed than Shane, but just as entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's always going to be Creature from the Black Lagoon is my favorite film from 1954. But then you've got Godzilla and them battling each other. And right now, it's Godzilla all the way. I mean, it's got to be Godzilla. I know that I've actually had playful arguments with previous guests and guest hosts of Monster Kid Radio, Steve Turek, about what is the best film from 1954. We've done the Rally Awards here on the show, and we've done your favorite monster movies from the 50s. Competitions or brackets here on the show, and Godzilla and the Gill Man are always battling it out. Always. Godzilla usually gets a pass because most of these competitions that we've done on the show, so to speak, these viewer voted on polls, we usually count Godzilla from 54 and then Godzilla King of the Monsters 56 as two separate movies. So the Gill Man gets 54 and King of the Monsters gets 56, but still, the Gillman and Godzilla battling it out for the most important monster movies for my money, but them is really good. And you mentioned 20,000 Leagues and being able to rent them. My family was pretty conservative growing up in terms of what I was allowed to watch. So a lot of what we would rent at the video store, even though I always looked at the horror movies and always was reading the back of the video cassette boxes to see what the movies were about, I could have told you everything I thought I knew about the Friday the 13th films because I had read the back of them growing on the shelf, but always quickly put them back on the shelf when my mom walked around the corner and pretended to be looking at some kids movie. I do remember checking those movies out over and over. The big white cases, taking them home, the Gnome Mobile, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Those became staples in my
Darby O'Gill was scary as a kid.
Oh, man, I love the stuff with the Banshee. That terrified me, but I loved it.
Yeah. You mentioned Godzilla again. Obviously, the original 54 is the one that set the bar.
Sure.
And the 56 version, I'm not a big fan of in the way that it's twisted and you get Perry Mason. I mean, Raymond Burr. You have to go back to the 54 version. And I'm guessing that it sounds like the original cut wasn't available in the United States until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, in its entirety. Is that true? Do you know about that?
That I don't know. I'd probably have to defer to some of my other fellow podcasters like Robert Kelly from Record All Monsters who would know more than I about that.
And one thing that, we were talking about favorites from 54, it's not a horror movie, but we briefly mentioned it earlier, is Rear Window.
Yes.
James Stewart in that movie is brilliant, and the way that it's shot, it's probably, I think, one of Hitchcock's most visual films. And he was a visual storyteller already. But Rear Window, the way it builds suspense and the way that you feel trapped in that apartment with James Stewart with the bad leg, looking through your camera, trying to figure out what's going on across the way and your imagination running wild. The suspense in that movie is taken to 11. And you can't look at that year and not hold that movie in high regard.
Yeah, and then you're watching it now and you're like, hey, there's that guy from Godzilla King of the Monsters.
That's right.
I like Godzilla King of the Monsters for what it is, but if I want a pure Godzilla experience, I'll watch the first one. I watch the 54 film. In fact, my favorite way to watch Godzilla King of the Monsters is to watch Godzilla and Godzilla King of the Monsters back to back with the commentary track on.
Wow.
It's the same guy doing the commentary track, and at the end, I forget who it is. Forgive me, but I think it's what's on the Criterion release now. If you watch the Godzilla with the commentary track on, he gets to the end of the movie and he's like, and I have so much more to say, so join me over at Godzilla King of the Monsters. And he picks right back up from where he left off at the beginning of Godzilla King of the Monsters on the commentary track there.
That sounds like a good experience. Maybe I should do that.
But to go back to Hitchcock, I love Hitchcock. I don't think we've never really talked about Hitchcock too much here on the show. He's not a monster movie guy. Yeah, he did Psycho. Yeah, he did The Birds, but he's not really a horror guy, so to speak. So we haven't really talked too much about Hitchcock, but you know what? We might do some of that later this year. I think it'd be fun to visit some of the scarier Hitchcock films. North by Northwest is one of my absolute favorite Hitchcock films, but so is Rear Window. So is The Man Who Knew Too Much. So is Rope. All of the James Stewart Hitchcock films are solid, and Rear Window, of the Hitchcock films of that, the best.
Absolutely. Are there any other time periods that come to mind that you want to set the Monster Kid time machine to for future episodes?
What are some other iconic films that see, it'd be easy to say, well, let's look at 1931, because that's when Dracula and Frankenstein came out. But those movies are so iconic, and they were game changers. They were the paradigm shift at the time. So is 31 really going to have more to offer other than those two big films overshadowing everything else? Had Hollywood or the studios had a chance to be influenced by those at that point? Or do we look just after that? I don't know. What do you think? Do you have an era or a year that you're looking at?
Not off the top of my head, but it's definitely one I'm going to think about, because this conversation's been fun. And there's a lot of other movies that are new to me in the past. So I'd be happy to time travel with you.
That's what we got to call this. Some sort of we'll come up with a clever time travel type funny name for this type of episode of MKR.
I'm there. I'll find some plutonium and we'll get the DeLorean ready.
There we go. Let's see. DeLorean, TARDIS, hot tub. What are some other time travel devices? Well, we'll just get in the time machine and have H.G. Wells, and then I don't know. Something, time machine.
Well, the time machine, that's a good movie. I like that original.
Yeah, so
great.
Well, listeners, again, if we've missed any of your favorites from 1954, please drop me a line, either as a comment over at monsterkidradio.net, or give us a call or shoot us an email, and I'll have Beth give you that information here in a moment. But in the meantime, Matt, what are you up to these days, man? Anything going on that Monster Kids should know about?
Not
I can think of something if you can. So.
Oh, please tell me, what should I be doing?
Well, you've got an event coming up.
Oh, yes.
George Romero brings back the dead. Night of the Living Dead has ended. Dawn of the Dead is here.
They must be destroyed on sight.
We have spawned our own savagery. Soon, it will consume us all. Dawn of the Dead contains scenes of violence that may be considered shocking. No one under 17 will be admitted. From United Film Distributing Company.
I'm talking about the Monster Kid Radio crashes Dawn of the Dead on April 14th at 2:30 p.m. at the Hollywood Theater here in Portland, Oregon. I think you marked us going. I hope I didn't.
Oh, I'm going. I've got my ticket, sir. I'm going. I've never seen any of the Romero Dead movies on a big screen.
Any of them?
Any of them. They've all been video. They've all been on the small screen at home. So to be able to go to the Hollywood Theater in Portland, Oregon, and watch Dawn of the Dead with you, I'm excited. Very excited.
That's going to be fun. Now, if you are a Facebook user, I will make sure there's a link in the show notes to the Facebook event page. Mark the event as if you're coming, or just mark it as if you're interested, because I've been trying to post some Dawn of the Dead related content on the event page just to kind of keep people excited about going. I am super stoked. This is one of my favorite Romero films of all time. And it's one that made me understand how filmmaking works. And I am looking forward to seeing the movie and covering the movie as a full-on episode of MKR shortly after we see it on the 14th at the Hollywood Theater. I recommend buying your tickets early. I don't know if they're going to sell out, but you don't want to miss your chance.
For listeners, tell them why they should see it on the big screen versus watching it at home.
Well, it's Dawn of the Dead, the time in which it was produced. Seeing movies on television was a thing, but Romero wasn't shooting for the small screen. He was shooting for the big screen. And there are several shots in this film that I can think of off the top of my head that I can't wait to see on the big screen. When the helicopter is flying over the mall, for example, and the characters are looking down at the mall, just having that big visual. When you are in the mall and you just see the horde of zombies coming, to see them big in your face that way, as opposed to seeing them confined to a little tiny TV, or even if it's a bigger screen TV like I've got here in the office, just having that grandeur as the world is breaking down around you. It just, Plus, this is a 45th anniversary restoration. I don't know what needed to be restored. Every version I've seen of it that I own now is good. So I'm curious to see what it looks like, quote unquote, restored. I also am curious to see what version of the film this is, which cut, because there are multiple cuts of this out there in the world. So I'm curious as to what footage may or may not make the final cut for the restoration. I would love for it to just have everything. I would love for it to have every single piece of footage that was intended for the film to be on the big screen. But we'll find out. We'll see.
The runtime, according to the Hollywood Theater's website, is 127 minutes. Will that get us most of the original movie in there, you think?
I think so. There are a few little extra bits and bobs here and there. And are they essential to the plot? No, not really. But it's fun to see. It's fun to see Joe Pilato, who would later on to be the villain of Day of the Dead, as a dock worker guy who doesn't really seem to understand what's going on around him and being a little clueless. So that's fun. And of course, it's fun to see more zombie carnage.
Especially since that zombie carnage was made by the master, Tom Savini.
Tom Savini, yes. So to see his work on the big screen. Now, I did see Dawn of the Dead during its 3D run a couple years ago. And it was fine, but it was a 3D after the fact kind of thing, obviously. And the process made the film look a little dark. And I'm pretty sure that's where I got COVID. So I'm looking forward to a COVID-free experience, properly lit viewing of Dawn of the Dead, April 14th.
I can't wait. I'm excited and looking forward to it.
It's going to be a good time. If you've been listening to my podcast for a long time, and I'm not just talking about this one, but just my podcasting career history, you might have recognized that little stinger there. That was a bit of music that I used to use on my old Mail Order Zombie podcast. Mail Order Zombie was a podcast that I ran for a few years. It was my first foray into podcasting, and the idea was that I was going to review zombie media you can only get in the mail, which back in the day meant you could get it through Netflix or order it through Amazon. Streaming wasn't really a thing, and it wasn't about mainstream zombie movies. It was just about getting zombie movies delivered to you in the mail, and I was going to talk about all of them. Well, that show eventually evolved to cover mainstream zombie movies as well as video games and books and all sorts of other types of zombie media, comic books, even a zombie opera once. That was a lot of fun. And I then put it behind me and started doing other things like the 1951 Down Place podcast, or specifically this one, Monster Kid Radio, which has been going on for over a decade now, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. However, zombies have been kind of crawling at the back of my brain for a while. I will admit that I kind of got over zombies. I out-zombied myself, over-zombied myself with that podcast, and then I had some things happen in my personal life. My grandfather passed away and ended up facing real death on a personal level with my family, and just zombie media didn't do it for me much anymore. At least the modern stuff. The classic stuff was always going to have a special place in my heart because it was different, and it was classic genre cinema that I love. So that didn't really impact that, but the newer stuff, outside of a few select titles like Dawn of the Dead, just the appeal wasn't there anymore. But again, like I said, the zombies have been clawing at the back of my brain for a very long time, and they are ready to come back out, partly because when we went to Kuwait, the haunt that Beth and I worked on, the haunt that Beth managed and, well, pretty much ran, was a zombie haunt. And on the other side of the world, I was asked to give a Zed talk to teach a bunch of mostly non-English speaking actors and a few actresses how to act like a zombie. And something about being in that zombie-centric atmosphere and environment, watching a makeup artist make up some pretty cool-looking zombie makeups, and just being in that world and reintroducing myself to things like Fulci's zombies movies, just kind of made me realize I missed it. I missed Mail Order Zombie. Now, this may disappoint some of you. I am not bringing it back as a podcast. I don't have time to launch another full-time podcast. I can't unless somebody's paying me to do it, and I don't have a benefactor to get Mail Order Zombie, the podcast, off the ground. However, I have been writing a lot and publishing, and you know what? It's time to bring back Mail Order Zombie as something you get in the mail, a journal that you can order online and have delivered to you. So the Mail Order Zombie journal will be launching later this year. I have reached out to a handful of people that you might know through Monster Kid Radio, fellow writers. I've also notified a few of the people that used to be involved with Mail Order Zombie as well to let them know what's going on with the Mail Order Zombie journal. Stay tuned. I don't have a launch date yet because I don't have any material in yet, but I can tell you that the material that has been pitched to me, this is going to be cool. We're going to have some classic zombie stuff because I can't get away from that. If one of the articles comes in that I've been told was going to come in, we've got something about I Walk with a Zombie coming, which will be really, really cool. We have a potential interview with some indie zombie filmmakers, a more modern zombie film that you can watch on Tubi right now. I'm hesitant to say what it is in case that article or that interview doesn't pan out, but right now it would be awesome if it does. And we have some other things as well. And like I said, some names that you'll be familiar with. If you are a creative, if you are a writer, consider this an open call for submissions. Email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com and let me know if you are interested in contributing to the first ever Mail Order Zombie journal. I will tell you straight up, this is not something that I can pay you for. There is no money involved yet. Maybe someday down the line, if we do multiple issues and there's regular income coming in from this, we can talk. But for the first issue, at least, what I can offer you in terms of payment is a PDF copy. I'll send you a free copy of the issue that you're in, and I'll give you some ad space for anything that you've got going on. If you have a podcast or a book or something you want to promote, ad space, yours in the Mail Order Zombie journal. I will be writing at least 2 pieces for this. Beth actually may be contributing something as well. It's something that she and I have talked briefly about, not in too many specifics, but it could happen. This is something I'm really looking forward to doing. And if it does well, like I said, we'll do multiple issues and maybe even we'll spread out a little bit, branch out and do more than just zombies down the line. But for right now, you can expect the Mail Order Zombie journal to launch at some point this year. I'd like to get it done sometime before the summer. Stay tuned for more information about that here on Monster Kid Radio or over at teamdeath.com. And remember, death is D-E-T-H. We'll make sure that we keep people posted over there as well. Let's play that music one more time.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
So we talked about some changes coming to Monster Kid Radio, some evolutions, so to speak. One of those things that I wanted to do was talk about some movies that were set in the store that were released or produced in the 70s. And to kind of open that conversation a little bit here on MKR, I wanted to, actually Beth suggested this and I thought this is a great way to do this. We just saw a movie. We just saw Late Night with the Devil, which is set in the 70s. So close enough.
Yeah. Wow. What a cool movie. If you have the chance to go, I know in many places it's got a limited run.
get out and see it so that that run can get extended. Just like we saw with Godzilla, it can happen, man. It can get held over weeks and weeks and weeks if the fans make it happen, and you will love this. If you love monster movies and you love old-timey late night, you will love this. And that's probably where you should pause if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want any spoilers at all.
We are going to spoil quite a bit.
Yeah.
And something else we're going to be doing on Monster Kid Radio is I'm going to start putting timestamps in the show notes. So if you want to continue listening to this podcast, pay attention to the show notes. You'll see the time codes that'll tell you when this review is over and the next segment begins. So you can skip ahead if you don't want to get spoiled. But we are going to spoil parts of the movie. Probably. This is all kind of ad hoc off the cuff. So we'll see. But Late Night with the Devil, it is presented as if it is a lost tape or a missing tape from a 70s TV show called Night Owls, talk show that rivaled Johnny Carson. And we get a real brief, narrated by Michael Ironside, no less.
Yeah.
A real brief history lesson as to what Night Owls was and the ratings war, I suppose you could say, and the main character's life with his wife, who unfortunately, and here's where the big spoiler, one of the big spoilers, no longer with us. She passed away due to lung cancer.
That's pretty early in the film. So yeah,
early in the film. So we get to hear his story, and he loses his wife, and he's about to lose his show because of ratings, and he cooks up this Halloween special
where he invites a whole slew of paranormally related guests on board together, including a skeptic, and insanity ensues.
It's nuts. So it stars David Dastmalchian.
Dastmalchian, yeah, good. Very nice.
Who is one of us. He is a monster kid. He's a geek. He's a nerd. He loves this stuff. And I say all these things with the most reverence and love. He has been in a number of superhero films, both sides of the fences, DC and MCU. He's done a lot of horror stuff over the years. He's a horror host. He's Dr. Fearless. If you watch any Midnight Mausoleum with Marlena Midnight, they cross over with Dr. Fearless every once in a while. And I believe he's done his own show as well. He's one of us. And my understanding is that he got this gig based on an article he wrote about horror hosts for Fangoria magazine. Because he's not just an actor, he's a writer as well. And the filmmaker saw that and was like, we need to talk to this guy. And that's what happened. And now he's fronting this great horror film.
It's, wow. I mean, we said spoilers, but for all that we can say about it, you can't spoil the visual feast that this film is with largely, I'd say, practical effects.
Yeah, and that's something that they tried to do is they wanted it to look like a 70s talk show.
And it did, man. Whew,
it really did.
The orange and tangerine, or maybe mandarin and tangerine, and then what, buttercup, and yeah, these shades of orange and yellow and tan, and his blue suit. Oh, that suit. Sharp. Baby blue suit.
With the big flared collars and the bell bottoms.
Oh my God, this one guy's got a collar that's like out to his shoulders with the tips of it. It was fantastic. And even
the hair. The hair.
The agent's hair.
Oh man.
We can tell you there's a thing, but we can't really spoil the hilarity.
The hair is just in the clothing, the wardrobe. Everything seemed pretty spot on for me. I do want to say real quick, because this kind of became a thing, there is a little bit of AI art in it. Just 3 quick instances of AI art. The filmmakers did come out and say that, yes, they did use some AI art for the beginning of some artwork that was used that was then later modified by their artists, specifically the interstitials, showing the, we'll be right back or whatever bits. Specifically, there's one with a skeleton, and you can kind of tell because the hand's all funky, which is a keystone of bad AI art. I think it's an interesting conversation to have down the line that I'm not really equipped to get into right now regarding whether or not that makes the movie, I don't know.
I think in that case, because honestly, with or without those, you could have had stuff printed on cardboard for that bit held in front of the camera, and it would have been just as effective, I think. I'm not sure it's a choice I would have made, and I think this is definitely a conversation for a future episode. And I think overall it's a conversation that needs to be had, and until the conversation is had and until a consensus is come to, it's going to be difficult to demerit productions that came before the conversation really began. We're going to have to sit down and have this conversation, but until we do, you can't blame people who use it as a form of brainstorming or something.
Sure.
You know, is it what I would have chosen? No, I would have gone to a couple artists, had them work up concepts, or even one artist, had them work up concepts, and then gone from there. But, you know, we all make different choices, and we all know that when you're putting on a movie, or anyone that's been in the movie industry knows, it's time, and anything you can save time on, even if it's a brainstorming session or something like that, you know, sometimes that's the difference between getting the movie made or not. So definitely want to have that conversation in future, but for right now, I don't think it has enough to do with the movie to really discredit it in any way.
Yeah, and I don't want to sidetrack too much, because I did really enjoy the movie, and the things that we do want to talk about, the 70s aesthetic is strong, it's thick, it's palpable, it just plucks at those nostalgic nerves. You know, I was born in 73, so I have some vague early childhood memories of like late 70s stuff, and I'm fascinated by the Satanic Panic stuff from the 80s and occult cinema in the 70s, how it really became a thing. So it really kind of played on that for me, and I really enjoyed that. And I thought it was really accurate in terms of like grabbing those notes and playing them loud and proud.
Oh, yeah, definitely in terms of design, like on the sets, the costumes, all those things. Even some of the music, the lead-ins and stuff, the stuff the band was playing. Yeah. I was, as a band nerd, you know, old jazz band nerd from high school, I really appreciated that stuff really felt 70s-esque. And then also down to the studio audience, which we get to see quite a bit of in throughout, you know, the different segments. The bleachers that they were sitting in really reminded me of the old 70s style bleachers that were at one of the stations here in the Portland area that we used to go down as a jazz band to do, like the after sports show or whatever. Once a year, you know, get invited, or once every few years you get invited down, and you got to sit in the stands and play music in and out of the segments and stuff. And they were the old bleachers in the old back, you know, unused sound stage or wherever, video stage or whatever. But it was very, very accurate for me. It felt like those same bleachers could have been in Mrs. Maisel. You know? Yeah,
it had that vibe. It felt like the Donahue show, you know, that style of the racking them in there. Just, yeah.
And so I really liked all of that attention to detail and stuff. Yeah, no, it was good.
So we talked about the lead, just, you know, David Dastmalchian was fantastic.
Chewing up the scenery
when he needed to, and just had this characterization down. I really enjoyed his performance. He wasn't alone, though, and I do want to comment on one of the other actors that I really liked, and that was Ian Bliss as Carmichael the Conjurer, who is clearly modeled after the Amazing Randy. That would... magician turned skeptic, right down to having the cash reward ready to anybody who can prove psychic phenomenon is real. And I just really loved his performance, his characterization. He's one of the guys that had the best costuming, and just this kind of sneering, slimy, I'm not going to believe you no matter what kind of approach. And in most cases, he's justified, because a lot of it was, you know, hijinks, trickery, stagecraft.
Things at that time, yeah.
Really, really enjoyed him in this. And, I think you reacted to him pretty well too, right?
Oh, yeah. He had me giggling lots of times. And then, you know, he really had me on during his big moment, if you will. I don't know about you. I was turning aside. I will tell you, folks, do not eat a big, like, spaghetti dinner before you go to this one. You'll regret it. Save it for, you know, do what we did. Do a Taco Bell run afterward.
No, he was really, really good. And everything about the character backgrounds that we got from everybody, from his background with like the Amityville house, and they even name dropped the Warrens, which was kind of cool because we've been watching the Conjuring films together as a couple, and to kind of get a little bit of that in there was fun. But not just his work as well. When we talk to, or when we meet Dr. June and Lily, the parapsychologist who probably has a little bit of a relationship going on with old Jack.
I think they're more than just interviewer and interviewee, if you get my drift.
It almost felt like to me Jack was trying to use them to prove to Carmichael that this stuff was real, give us that money, and he was going to take that money and run. Maybe not run, but he was being motivated by the money a little bit.
Well, I mean, the whole setup is that it's Halloween, it's the first night of ratings, and they're going to do something spectacular, so maybe there is that small thought of, if it doesn't go well, but we've proven it and gotten the money, maybe that's the escape plan,
Lily was super creepy.
The looks. Very, very good stage presence, very good camera awareness. My goodness.
Which camera do I look into now, Jack? No, just stop.
Call me Mr. Delroy again. Huh?
I also really liked Gus, the sidekick. Gus was played by Race Aturi, and the vibe I got off of him was the relationship that I got off of them. Him and Jack felt a lot like the Gary Shandling talk show that was on HBO, I think in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s. Just that relationship between the host and the sidekick. And I really liked that as well. And what happens to Gus? Oh,
Gus. I mean, yeah, they really seem like best friends.
Sure. Kind of. Kind of. Just everything about it. Just this was a lot of fun. And we almost didn't go see it, to be honest, because we were going to go see it at the Kiggins Theater, which is our downtown theater here in Vancouver. But, things just weren't working out. So when Beth was like, I found a place somewhere else later tonight. Yeah, I'm so glad you made that happen.
Yeah. Hats off to the entire cast and the effects team, makeup team. I really appreciate it. As someone who works in practical effects a lot in the haunt industry, I appreciated all of the practical effects, and it really was a stage show that was brilliantly filmed.
This could be done on stage, probably. There are a few moments. There are some optical effects, especially during the finale.
Might need a plant or two in the audience, but...
Well, and there's some electrical stuff that happens, and the very, very end, we have some real crazy stuff happening to the kid on stage, and electricity shooting off, and just nuts, like, what happened to her head was crazy.
That was, I have never seen that happen to a human head before.
I'm glad to hear that. At the end of the movie, it no longer feels like a found footage situation where we have this random tape that was been found.
Yeah.
There is a crossover to a more, I want to say linear storytelling or traditional storytelling, but it's still pretty surreal and absurd. How did you feel about that?
I really enjoyed it. I decided that, this movie was going to take us for a ride, and I was just going to go along for it. So I would say that that's how I would view it, is you're going to go on a crazy ride, the same that you'd get on a roller coaster, and then, just as it starts going, you regret it instantly until you don't again. But it for me was a wild ride. I really liked it. I don't want to spoil anything about that section, even just in case that they haven't, seen it yet at this point. But it was pretty freaky. I was holding your hand pretty tight. And I'm usually the one giggling through horror movies. I don't think I was giggling on this one.
I giggled a couple of times.
Early on,
and during Gus's big scene. I kind of chuckled a little bit when the head thing happened. I am on Reddit quite a bit, and I follow the found footage Reddit board. And just recently they started talking about the movie The Last Broadcast, which is a found footage film that came out just before the Blair Witch Project, same month, I believe, even. And it's a very similar story, except at the very end, and this movie is old enough, again, spoiler, I guess, but at the end of that movie, it does change from found footage to traditional narrative. What happens at the end of this movie, And I bring it up because a lot of people didn't like that. People are like, well, it took me out of the whole experience because now it's not found footage anymore and just an awkward transition. At the end of this movie, we do have that slight transition moment where he starts to have this surrealistic kind of vision, like what's happening to me kind of thing going on. I didn't find it nearly as jarring as something like in the last broadcast, which I do like, don't get me wrong, but this one is a better, like, we are now following his journey into his own hell, I suppose.
And a hell of his mind.
Yeah.
His memories.
How they got the cameras in there, I don't know.
But, you know, what I really did appreciate, there were a couple continuous shots with the camera swinging around a stage and actual people clearly moving set pieces around, setting things in place, working around, you know, moving equipment to get these continuous shots. And I really appreciated those. And they really reminded me of that, like, late 70s. I guess for me, it's early 80s. I'll confess I wasn't watching anything in the late 70s, but early 80s. Price is Right sort of shuffle things around behind the scenes feeling, you know?
Yes.
The old Bob Barker collars and stuff. It really had that kind of feel to it, and I really enjoyed that. What did you think about, it's something that took me a bit to catch on to, but I wanted to know what you thought about the change in perspective when we were live or we were on the air or we were at commercial. If you want to elaborate on what I mean by that.
Yeah, so we went from the old 4:3 ratio to a more widescreen and then back to TV again during commercial breaks. And the commercial breaks, we didn't see commercials. We just saw what happens behind the scenes during a commercial break on a talk show. And I didn't notice it at first, which I suppose makes it even better.
And did you catch a lot of it was in black and white?
Oh, yeah, I did catch that.
Yeah,
for sure.
okay.
For sure. Black and white, split screen at times.
Yeah. But yeah, it took me a bit too to catch on to it. But once I did, it was brilliant because it definitely changed how you saw the characters reacting. You know, certain characters were always on when the cameras were on, and then they would change their behavior or what they were saying quite quickly when they'd gone to break.
I'd like to watch this again around Halloween. It is set on Halloween. I feel like it would have done better if it was released in October. But I'm glad it was released now because it meant I got to see it now and I don't have to wait till Halloween.
That's true, and maybe they're setting themselves up for a big re-release around Halloween. That would be brilliant. It would, boy, if you could get a hold of an old TV studio, it'd be really fun to put a haunted house in it and do it themed after this.
Or I would even as a stage show.
Or as a stage show, yeah. I'd be fun to figure out all the effects for, because there are some that I'm still not entirely sure how they were doing them, but I'm pretty sure they were practical effects.
Most of it was practical. There were a few digital moments. There's a moment with the psychic's eyes that were, I'm sure, digital. Mm-hmm. And there were some optical effects done down the line as well with, lightning bolts and things like that. But yeah, just physically it worked. And even moments that you knew had to be special makeup effects felt appropriate to the era. With what happens to Gus, it felt like something out of a 70s horror movie.
And like even you said the lightning bolts, they looked like the 70s lightning bolts that were like painted on or something, you know? They were done that way or it looked like they were done that way. So very nicely done on that too. But yeah, I just the whole thing was a great homage to a very ugly era.
You just call the 70s an ugly era?
Design-wise, yeah. I think we can all agree on that now, right? The shag carpet, the orange, the oak, so much oak. Oh, yeah, we don't need to do glass coffee tables anymore. They're just not practical.
Glass coffee tables, not practical. Late Night with the Devil, filled with practical effects.
Yes.
And definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely. Catch it at your local smaller theater in many cases, or at some of the big boys. We saw it at a Regal.
Yeah, we did. And I think it's going to get a run on Shudder here very soon. Shudder is one of the distributors of the film. There's like 7 or 8 production companies and distributors behind this thing. So you should be able to find it somewhere, hopefully. And I do recommend it. Beth recommends it.
Yeah.
And she has yet to make a wrong decision. So
2 bloody thumbs up. Have something you'd like to share with Monster Kid Radio? You can email the podcast at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484.
And that means it's the end of the show. We are at the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Huge thanks to Kenny and Mark for their segments. Huge thanks to Matt for making the time to come on here and talk about the movies of 1954. I was sincere. If there was a movie that we missed, if there's a movie from 1954 you want us to talk about, well, you know how to let us know. If you don't, Beth will remind you here in a second. And huge thanks to, well, you for downloading the show. Oh, and I suppose I ought to thank Beth as well. Not just because she's in the room and can hear me right now and kind of smiling a little bit as she's pretending not to hear me, but huge thanks to my wonderful, beautiful, talented, skilled, lovely wife for being part of the conversation regarding Late Night with the Devil. Thanks for retweeting tweets and sharing posts on Facebook and spreading the word about Monster Kid Radio. Really appreciate that as well. I've mentioned the website a few times, monsterkidradio.net. Make sure you head over there to find links to everything that we've talked about here on the show. There will be a link to the Facebook event page for Dawn of the Dead happening in mid-April. That's going to be so cool. I'm so looking forward to that. As well as links to our Amazon affiliate page. If you are an Amazon user and want to buy any of these movies that you heard us talk about in the 1954 discussion, please use that link because we make a few pennies off of every sale and it doesn't cost you anything extra. I really hope you can help support the show that way. You're also going to find links to our Discord, our Reddit, and specifically our Patreon. And I'm cooking something up special for our Patreon users or Patreon patrons. Stay tuned for that. I need to run something by Beth before I commit to it and announce it here on the show. But I've got something in mind. Something that might involve a little bit of video, so stay tuned for that as well. Speaking of staying tuned, and Beth, next week, we're doing it. She's taking me down to Who-ville to fill my hoo-hole. You know, I say that now more just to get a reaction of her than anything else, but we are going to finally watch some Doctor Who. I am going to watch some classic Doctor Who. The old school stuff with Beth, and we're going to talk about it here on the show. We're probably going to make it through 2 or 3 episodes. The original Doctor Who stuff was pretty short. I think they were about half an hour long, if not shorter. So we're going to watch some Doctor Who, and that's coming up next week on the show. After that, not really sure yet, but I've got some feelers out to bring some old familiar names back to the podcast. Robert Kelly, so stay tuned for that.
Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death or other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, Monster Kid Writer, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. That's teamdeath.com. Please rate and review Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
On top of their game is copyright 2021 Surfer Joe. It's from their release World Traveler. You can find them over at surferjoe.bandcamp.com to check that out. Or you can go to surfmusic.net and check out their website. I think it's cool that they actually grabbed that website. I mean, for a surf band to grab surfmusic.net, how cool is that? Quite the coup? Whatever. Check out Surfer Joe at all of those websites. And again, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. They are on a European tour starting in mid-April in Germany and Copenhagen and a whole bunch of other places that I don't think I can pronounce. And they will be here in the States at the end of June through the beginning of July, and then up in Canada as well. All of those tour dates will be available on their website at surfmusic.net or surferjoe.bandcamp.com. However you check them out, let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.